Hello, this is El Spectra, and welcome back to part 3 of my mini guide series on the Battle Disorder. And in this video, I want to focus on the mechanics of Arma in the Battle Disorder battle engine. And the reason why I want to talk about this is that the BOD engine, battle engine, is actually quite different from what you would see outside of BOD. And that being open field PvP, arena, and all that jazz. So the main difference is that armies, both attackers and defenders in the Battle Disorder, appear to deal much higher damage than outside of the Battle Disorder. As everyone knows, we have something called tree buffs, and this gives extremely big stat boost across all categories, that being HP, ferocity, defense, and attack. However, the stats really do not account for the difference in the field between the BOD battle engine and the battle engine outside of BOD, because as you would notice in a lot of fights, armies tend to receive a lot of damage from normal attacks especially. And buffs and debuffs don't really appear to work anywhere near as effectively in the Battle Disorder. To the bottom left, you'll actually see a video recorded by my clanmate between the clash on this altar between BHT, which is the primary alliance from server 51, and Valhalla, which is the our alliance from server 12. To give a little bit of context, we got to this altar before BHT, and therefore we declared war on this altar about 12 hours ago. And as we are about to burn this altar down, Manstein, which is BHT's top player, and the other players from BHT suddenly launched a ambush to overtake our capture, meaning that if they get the last hit, they will actually be the ones capturing this altar instead of us, meaning that they will get it for free from us. So we had to put up quite a bit of effort to ensure that we were the one dealing the last hit. And I think that was quite a good showcase of using armaments across different hero teams, which is what I will be talking about next. This player, to give a little bit of introduction, he is really quite strong in terms of stats. In terms of baseline stats, he is much higher than what I have. His Lord power is about 88 million. And if this was anywhere outside of the Battle Disorder using the normal battle engine, I would be no match against him. If I were to send a, say, 20,000 army against his 20,000 army in a mirror matchup, he would lose about maybe 30 to 40% of his army at best. At most, I mean. But in the Battle Disorder, because both sides are able to deal so much damage to each other, I think overall it is a much more non-well friendly environment, and a single well really cannot completely dominate an alliance with a high amount of activity. And that is because each army, once a clash happens, you will suffer a lot of damage, and you cannot sustain that damage over the course of multiple fights. So while the recording is playing on the bottom left, feel free to take a look at it. I will be going over multiple battle report and discuss the Arma differences, the hero differences, and the outcome. So starting out with, let's see, which report do I want to start out with? Let's start from here. So in this report, we can see that the armies are about the same, and I ran Lisbeth with Hanzo's Arma versus his Charlotte with Lisbeth's Arma. Kellerman are on both sides, and he ran Morgan with the Quinn Arma versus my Quinn. And I feel that Quinn versus Morgan with Quinn Arma is about relatively similar. So the only major difference here is Lisbeth with Hanzo and Charlotte with Lisbeth. And the result is fairly evident. I feel that Hanzo's skills are just simply much more superior to Lisbeth's skills in this matchup. So Kellerman is really a surprise in the Battle Disorder battle engine, because although buffs and debuffs don't really work as effectively as before, disarm is like a black and white system. You're either disarmed or you're not disarmed. So it actually works just as effectively in this battle engine as the normal battle engine. So going on to the next report. And here you can see the difference between having some sort of Kellerman, some sort of disarm, I should say, versus not having disarm at all. My normal attacks are higher across the board. And you can see Morgan with Quinn's Arma versus Quinn, they are about very similar in performance. The next scenario is, let me see. The next scenario is once again Kellerman. Now he is running Kellerman with Michael's Arma. And this is fairly good because Kellerman still is able to use his awakening skill. So if we go to the heroes here, we can see that even if we replace the skills using an armament, this awakening skill is not related to the rage skill and therefore will still take effect, applying a 30% chance of disarm every time he receives a normal attack. So the less normal attack you receive, the more beneficial it is, because you will be losing troop at a lower pace and be able to continuously dish out heavy damage. Where was I? Here. So in this scenario, we have Hanzo versus Lisbeth. And personally, I think that Lisbeth with Hanzo's Arma is better than running Hanzo himself. And that is simply because Lisbeth has much higher stats than Hanzo. But in this case, I think it is fairly equivalent because stats don't feel like they have nearly as much impact in this battle engine as outside of this battle engine. Next one is 214. Okay, this is fairly similar to the previous one. And in this case, we have Horus with Michael's armament compared to Kellerman. And in this case, Horus really loses out, not only in terms of stats. We can just compare the stats here. I am significantly lower in stats across the board. And if you take a look at the normal damage, you will see that his normal damage is so much higher than mine, especially in the case of Charlotte. You can see that my hero skill damage is still very respectable compared to his, and that is really showcasing the power of how hard Hanzo can hit. But I lost this fight by quite a big margin, mostly because I simply did not have disarm in this fight. And one other thing I want to point out, if it is a Quinn versus Quinn scenario, or Morgan using Quinn versus Morgan using Quinn scenario, the defending side appears to be able to hit much harder than the attacking side. And I just also want to make a comment on the troop composition here. I think it is much better to use fewer cavalries when you are not facing multiple armies. So the danger of So the danger of using too few cavalries, like say you use one cavalry, although that is reasonable in arena, for example, where you just want to beat a team. When you're going against multiple teams, the moment you lose your cavalry, you will lose all buffs associated with the cavalry. So that if you have another fight following that, you will be at a heavy disadvantage without having the cavalry buffs. And I will showcase an example of that at the end of this video. Did I just crash? No, I didn't. So the next example is, so this is Michael with Kellerman's Arma versus Kellerman with Michael's Arma. And I think this is a very interesting scenario because it shows that better disarm leads to better result. Although I must say that his army size is much higher. And especially in the case of the Battle of Disorder, the army size matters much more than outside of the Battle of Disorder. So based on this, you can tell that my normal attack damage was suppressed to a much greater extent than his normal attack damage. So this looks to be a fairly mirror matchup. And what I want to comment on here is that Quinn will hit before Morgan. So if you are fighting a Morgan army while you're running a Quinn army, you will be able to hit first, especially with your cavalry. So you can see here, my cavalry was able to deal a lot of damage to his cavalry simply because I have 40% recharge speed while his recharge speed is only 35%. And the main reason why I lost here was simply because my army size was so small. This is another example. In this case, his army was much smaller, but you can see once again here, my Hannibal using Quinn's Arma was able to deal a lot of damage and probably wipe out his Hannibal in the first attack. So actually, let's watch this video. Let's watch this replay. And I mostly want to focus on my cavalry and the damage he deals to the opposing cavalry. Because since normal attacks are dealing so much damage, you really want to lower their troop count. Look at that, 60,000 damage. And instantly, his cavalry will no longer be able to deal any sort of impactful damage on my infantry. And in the future, I will make a video on how damage scales according to the total troop count, the total enemy troop count, as well as your unit troop count. There's actually a formula which models the damage according to your own troop count, according to those three variables: your own troop count, the total troop count of your army, and the enemy army's troop count. So that would be quite a fun video. My game crashed, so I'll have to reload it and get back to where I was. I'm just going to take a quick look to see if I'm getting attacked. Great, I'm not. I was planning to make this video a little earlier, but they kept attacking me. So, but hey, it resulted in 2 impromptu videos, which is, I'm not going to complain. So moving on to the next report, which happened at, these are getting a little difficult to track. Okay. It is this one. So this one we're looking at Okay, so this one we're looking at Michael with Kellerman's Arma versus Kellerman with Michael's Arma once again. And first I want to look at Quinn versus Quinn. We can see that his Morgan using Quinn's Arma was able to deal so much damage to my Quinn, which is a never good for me. But curiously, I seem to have been able to prevail in this setup versus the previous setup. And we can go to the previous report to see exactly why that is the case. I think it's... Okay, I think it's this one. That is 21415. Okay. So actually, no, not this one. This one, yes. So this one, okay, I can't figure why there was a difference, and that difference is most likely in the troop count. So here I have Michael versus, here I actually have Notice Arm. Okay, it's not this one. I'm looking for the case where he is running Kellerman plus Michael's Arma. Here it is. Okay. I apologize for that. This is the video I was referring to. So why did I lose this one and win the other one? So most likely what happened here is that his troop count was simply much higher. And he had a fairly proper formation setup in this army, a troop formation setup versus the other clash here. So we can see the difference between the two army compositions, where I lost to the good army composition but was able to win by 36% over a bad troop composition. So the troop composition is still very important in the battle disorder. You want to make sure that first, your cavalry isn't getting wiped out by fodder armies, and second, your cavalry is few enough in troops that you can put a majority of them into the infantry and some of them into the archer. So moving on to the next report. Here I have Michael using Kellerman and Hansel versus Notice Arm. So I won by quite a big margin here. Same deal, winning by a big margin. And same deal here. So here, I think what happened is he started copying my setups. Okay, so going back to this report, the difference between this report, where I ran my standard composition, and this report, the subsequent report, where I ran a more customized composition. In the more customized composition, with few cavalry and most of my troops in the archer and infantry, we can see that I lose much fewer troops than the case where I had fewer archers and a lot of infantry. I lost about 20,000 fewer troops in the scenario where I used a better troop formation setup. And he kind of, I'm sure he didn't like that. So he started copying my troop formation. And the reason why I still won here was that my armas were simply better. I was running Michael with Kellerman Arma, so I had this arm, and Hansel which was able to deal a lot of damage to his infantry. So let's actually watch this report. I'm really not a fan of this camera angle. I'm not too sure why there are two camera angles, but yeah. So take a look at his Michael versus my Michael. The moment Hanzo hits with the ultimate, which actually does not do that much damage, because I think the Battle Disorder only really boosts normal attack damage. But you can see a majority of those numbers are white. And the reason why that is the case is because he is disarmed and he cannot do normal damage versus me. And so I'm able to hit him pretty much for free over half of this battle. Now, in the next fight, you can see the difference in comparing the previous fight where I had better armas and this fight where it was a mirror matchup. I actually had more army, a greater army count, 250,000 versus 228,000 in the second fight, because I saw that he was starting to copy my setup. And once he copies my setup, the only difference between the two of us is the stats. And his stats are still so much higher than mine. So even with a higher troop count, I was not able to win over this mirror matchup. So at this point, it is pointless to use cavalry. So I just use one cavalry and put the rest of my remaining army in archers and infantry. And in this case, I think I should have used slightly more archers than infantry. I mean, not than infantry, but maybe 90,000 archers and 160,000 infantry, simply because Windstrider, it still deals a lot of damage to the archers, and we simply cannot ignore that fact. So after the first volley, my archers were actually fairly hurt. Let's take a look here. And I actually think that his Quinn did a lot of damage to my archer. So look at my archer's HP. Okay, Quinn. So Windstrider dealt 30,000 damage to my archers, which is insane. So now I knew he was copying my army setup, but there was really not much I could do against it. So when a fight, when a battle kind of becomes this kind of stalemate, what you will have to do is just use two armies to kick him out. And he will be very vulnerable to your second army, because either he will have no cavalry or his infantry will be pretty much completely dead. And now I actually want to talk about the risk of just running one cavalry, is that you can easily lose that cavalry to any random attack. And once you lose that cavalry, your army will be very vulnerable to a subsequent attack by a strong player. And I think this is the point where I saw that his cavalry was dead, so I launched an attack against him. And yeah, so this is self-explanatory. He still managed to do a lot of damage to me, and that is mostly because, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, buffs unfortunately do not really work in the Battle Disorder. They are nowhere near as effective as outside the Battle Disorder. So yeah, that covers a majority of the scenarios. So in summary, I think the best teams for Battle Disorder are Kellerman, just Kellerman, no Armas at all, because he will be able to apply the full spectrum of this arm. So either Kellerman or Michael running Kellerman's Arma. So that is the best infantry, best choice of infantry. In terms of cavalry, definitely either Quinn or Morgan with Quinn's Arma. And when you are facing Quinn, I think it is best to, if it is a 1v1 scenario, it is best to run very minimal cavalry, because his cavalry will somehow be able to hit your cavalry first and deal a lot of damage. Versus a multiple army scenario, you would want to use enough cavalry so that your cavalry doesn't get wiped out too quickly. Finally, in terms of the archers, I think the best archer absolutely is Lisbeth with Hanzo's Arma. Not only does she get to use Hanzo's skills, but she also gets the advantage of her awakening skill, which is actually fairly powerful. It reduces the enemy troops' final attack by 10% and final ferocity by 5%. So I'm not too sure whether that still applies in BOD, in the BOD combat engine, but that is essentially a 15% overall damage reduction. Alternatively, you can also use Hanzo himself without armas. You will just suffer a bit of lower stats, a bit of a reduced stats. And lastly, I want to go over extended battles. So in a lot of cases, a fight will start lasting for multiple hours, and you will start running out of energy in your main marches. So what I do is not only do I switch out the armas, I also change out the gear, because gear nowadays are very impactful. So my main team is currently garrisoning my HQ, and I don't really want to waste the energy to remove this garrison. So I will just explain what I do when I kind of run out of energy on my main teams. So I remove their armas, and then I also remove their equipment. And I go to my sub teams, and I equip the respective armas and equipments to them. So that will give me the best stats that I can possibly manage with that sub team. And the sub team will be, unfortunately, it will be a lot weaker than the main team, but it will still be able to, it will still be usable as a decent damage dealing team versus having simply nothing. I think that is all I need to cover. So best of luck, everyone who is about to clash in the center. And I hope that this guide was useful. And I think that in the future, they will probably update the battle mechanics so that it coincides with the normal battle mechanics. Because this battle mechanic is just, it feels kind of weird, kind of non-intuitive. Although, once again, it does bring more power to players with high activity and players who do not wail as much. Because outside of the Battle Disorder, let's say this was Battle of Conquest, we would have virtually no way to deal with Manstein when he's active, because his stats are just simply so high. But in the Battle of Disorder, as you saw in my previous video, my marches and my second in command's marches, they could not kick out more than a dozen or two marches from Genesis. Even though Genesis marches were very weak, each march was able to shave off a significant amount of HP from our attacking army. So activity is definitely an important factor in the Battle Disorder. And armaments are just a way to, an important tool for heavy hitters to best leverage the limited energy that they have. And energy is one of the most important resources in leveraging your power in BOD. So I will end it here. I'll see everyone in the next video.